What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast, and here we talk about movies and streaming shows that are all horror. And I'm with my very good friend over there, Dr. Zayas God, Danny Torkel. Both Danny and I are members of the Fangoria Horror Community Facebook page, and I love it. I think Danny loves it too. One of the posts that was on there, Danny, I think you probably maybe even answered it, was if you could have dinner with two horror people, I'm assuming horror filmmakers, that are alive, who would you pick? Did you answer that question?
I didn't, but now I'm thinking about it. It's an interesting one. Who would you pick?
I wrote my answers. My answers were Keith David, because I love Keith David's voice. I think he's so cool. I just would love to talk to him and hear him talk. The other person I think you'll think is pretty obvious for me, but it's Guillermo del Toro. Now, I love Guillermo del Toro. I also love to hear Guillermo del Toro talk. I love his voice, but I also just love the brilliant things he says.
Mm-hmm. I was watching some of the video that you shared with me, which I wish you would have shared over an hour before.
Right.
Because it was an hour-long interview with Del Toro and Isa Lopez.
Right.
And I copied down. He does this one. He like he's a comedian. He says this one thing about. She says that this movie that we're going to talk about, Tigers Are Not Afraid, was her vomiting her soul, and then he goes into, well, that's good because in order to vomit, you need to have eaten all of that stuff that needs to be inside of you in order for you to vomit it out.
Yep.
And he goes, too much of the movies that are in theaters today are dry heaves. And I thought that was such a friggin' great line.
That is excellent.
And I think that her saying that, like, this movie was her vomiting up her soul, and his way of putting that, in order to really make a deep movie that has personal ties to you, it has to be the stuff that you've consumed to then come out of you. I thought that was just a fascinating use of language there. And to get back to your question, the first thought that popped into my head was just a nice, fun, casual dinner with Mike Flanagan and Kate Siegel.
Oh, there you go. That's an obvious one. Yes, the Lassercast. Right. Good call. Yeah. The reason why I brought that question up is because you're talking about this video I just shared with you where it's Guillermo del Toro talking to Isa Lopez, and he's basically asking her about this movie that we're talking about today, Tigers Are Not Afraid. Now, when Guillermo is talking to someone else, I'm usually just sitting there waiting for the other person to finish so I can hear Guillermo talk. Because he's so interesting. But Isa Lopez kind of dominates the conversation because it's her movie. But I feel like she is super interesting, and I'm so very glad that I found that clip. And I'm so very glad that she's doing True Detective Season 4, Night Country. There's been a lot of talk about, like, especially like on Reddit and stuff, there's all these dudes that are like, oh, Season 1 is good, this is crap, and they don't do this right in this season, and it's just really starting to get on my nerves.
What's interesting about that is apparently this is like the highest rated True Detective on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah.
It's got like 100% Rotten Tomato review from critics, which is the highest, even higher than season 1. Yeah. But then right at the same time that I saw that, I saw a really discouraging quote from Nick Pizzolatto, the creator of True Detective, who like kind of slapped down at this season and said he thought it was stupid that they were trying to connect it to, that there were, spirals and things that are connecting it to season 1. And Isa Lopez very classily was just like, well, I loved his material and I wanted to make it my own, and he's entitled to his opinion. And, like she handled it with class. But it is a very, we talked about this in our True Detective episode 3 review a little bit, how it feels like there's this, even though it's very well regarded and a lot of my friends love it. And we talked about it, at work, we talk about it when I'm hanging out with them on the weekends.
Right.
The online community seems very split, seems very divisive. And, does that just come back to the simple fact of like female creator plus female leads equals backlash?
Right. Yes.
Sadly, it might be,
Yeah.
but yeah, I love this season so far.
Yeah.
And it's because of this season of True Detective that we're covering this movie today.
Yes. And I mean, it's not even, I think it even goes further because it's female Mexican creator versus white male creator. White, and you see this like in Star Wars, see this in comic books and stuff, where it's just like if a person is not a white man, you usually get pushed back, and there's some sort of disdain, or like they point out the flaws or issues a lot more when it's not a white man that's behind the scenes. Now, Isa Lopez, what's really interesting when you start watching that video, which I urge you guys all to seek out on YouTube. It's her and Guillermo del Toro talking about Tigers Are Not Afraid. She talks about how her early career was making romantic comedies in Mexico. And then she basically pushed to make this movie, which she sort of every day made herself write a scene before she got out of bed. That was like a thing that she wanted to do. And it, made this movie. It's interesting because this movie, I feel like it's a conservative's wet dream about Mexico. Like this movie, it feels like a post-apocalyptic movie, but it's set in Mexico. Now, right off the bat, I want to show that my ignorance about Mexico is pretty deep. And I live right next to Mexico. I live in Texas. But like my knowledge of Mexico is essentially based on people that have lived there and I know that I work with, and then also movies. And those movies are like Sicario and The Devil's Backbone and shows like Breaking Bad. So that's like the white equivalent of saying like, oh, well, I know America. It's Winter's Bone and Tales from the Hood or something. Like it's not accurate.
Yeah, my aunt was married to a Mexican man. My cousin is half Mexican, and I still see my former uncle. I actually got to see him last year when I was in Phoenix, and he, him and my nephew go. Him and my cousin. They go back and forth to Mexico all the time, and they always talk about how great it is. And maybe it's the history teacher in me. I've always wanted to go to Mexico just to find the, historic Mexico City built on Aztec, cities with Aztec temples. And I always wanted to go and do like a historical tour. But yeah, it is one of those places that, when we see it portrayed in film, it is usually the dark, gritty, criminal side of Mexico. Yeah.
Yes. And so this movie is kind of relentless with how dark it is. There's little small bits of innocence, but for the most part, it is like the worst kind of rumors or dark tales you could hear about Mexico. That's like this whole movie. And what's amazing about this movie is the cast. There's a couple of interesting things I learned, like going through the IMDb trivia and just like the Wikipedia and stuff. But basically, from what I learned from the IMDb trivia, these were all kids that have like zero acting experience. They weren't shown the script before they would film. Like they basically like would react kind of authentically to what was going on around them. And that the movie was set in chronological order. So like, I mean, it was filmed in chronological order. So like they kind of experience every scene. The kids, considering they have no acting ability, are pretty fucking amazing. Like Paulo Lara as Estrella. Yes.
I have a fairly long history with this movie in the sense that this movie came out in Mexico in 2017. It wasn't released in the United States until December of 2019. And it was a Shudder exclusive. It's still streaming on Shudder. And so before we spoil anything, if you've never seen this, if you're into True Detective Night Country, go watch this movie. It's like 85 minutes.
Yeah.
As Bong Joon-ho said at the Oscars, if you can get if you could live above that 1-inch mark of subtitles, you'll find an absolutely amazing film. I saw this was I think this might have actually been the first time I ever went to the IFC Center.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
a theater that I have since joined, and now I'm like a member of because I end up going there so often. I'm actually going there 3 times in the next week for their
Jesus.
Dario Argento retrospective. I'm going there
Nice.
tomorrow for Inferno, Monday night for Tenebrae. Yeah, very exciting. Um, I saw this late at night, probably like a 9 o'clock show at the IFC Center a couple days before it hit Shutter, and it absolutely blew me away. 2019 was one of my favorite years in movies. It was one
Yeah.
of my favorite years in horror.
Yeah.
I actually dug up and I sent you like my old Geeks of Doom when I was writing for Geeks of Doom. I wrote a review of this movie, a standalone review of this movie, where I just showered it with praise. And it was also my number one horror film of 2019, and it was above Doctor Sleep, which is one of my all-time favorite movies.
Dang,
Um,
that's saying a lot.
and I continually brought up that this may be the greatest child acting I had ever seen in a film, especially the two leads, Paolo Lara, who plays Estrella, and what do you have the name of the boy? Juan Ramon Lopez, who plays
Yes.
Shine or Shine. They are just mind-bogglingly good. And when you find out that this is the first time they've ever been in anything, it blows your mind, because that's like the old adage is you never work with animals, you never work with children.
Right.
And to find children who had never worked before to be the leads in a movie that is this dark and this bleak and this demanding of them physically
Right.
and emotionally is absolutely amazing.
Yes, completely agree. And that was one of the things that Isa Lopez said in the interview with Guillermo del Toro, that like they had to stretch out the shoot of the movie. The movie was like 36 days to shoot, but they had to stretch it out because you can't work with kids for a certain amount of time. Like there's legal constraints for how long you can work with child actors too. But the kids are fantastic. There's a fairy tale quality to this movie, and there's innocence to these kids, but then there's also this hardness. Like with Estrella, it's not that she's like this mean person, but she's so desensitized to all the craziness. We can kind of start going into spoilers at this point, but very early on in the movie, there's a scene where she's in school and there is a gun being shot off screen, and everyone drops to the floor because they know what's going on. It's not that kind of moment where they're like, is that gunshots? It's just like they know automatically drop. And it's just like kind of standard practice in this setting of this movie. Now,
Yeah.
when she's on the floor, there's this part that kind of ties in the fairy tale aspect. She's supposed to write an essay about make a fairy tale story. And then her teacher, who's also on the floor trying to not be killed, gives her 3 pieces of chalk. And she says, these pieces of chalk represent 3 wishes. And then you can make 3 wishes, right? I guess basically to make Estrella not feel scared. It's so funny because like she seems desensitized to everything around her. And then Shine is this young boy, this little kid that I could see in one of my schools that I work at. And he is trying to essentially be a gangster, right? He's in a gang and he's acting like a tough guy. And in a lot of movies, you have this kind of scene where the gangster kid kind of breaks down and they kind of like they want their mom or something, or they become scared. They kind of show their colors. But this kid is just like throughout the whole movie, this badass kid.
Hardened by the world around him. And Estrella too, like she goes home. I just want to make a quick comparison to like the life that we live as educators in America, where it's like school shootings are this horrible, unfortunate reality that we deal with.
Yeah.
But when they happen, it is still shocking.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. But like, so in my school just a few weeks ago, we had a 2+ hour soft lockdown / hold where there was a threat of a weapon. Turned out that it wasn't as serious a situation as we thought, but a weapon was on campus and we had to shut down and basically hold students in the classroom for over 2 hours.
Wow.
And the way we deal with it in like an American classroom, and I'm in New York, you're in Texas, it's like everything stops. It's just like, okay, lights off, door shut, locked, and you know, we hold our breaths and we hope that this blows over and we're not one of these national news stories. This just felt like Tuesday for Estrella.
Yes, yes, yes.
And the teacher, where it's like, all right, everybody, the gang, the cartels are murdering people outside, everybody down. She walks outside after, there's a body on the street. She just kind of like, there it is, turns and goes the other way. She goes home and her mother isn't home. And there's hints that her mother has been kidnapped and killed by the cartels, by these gangs. And she just kind of sits at home. She doesn't react. And it really kind of fuels that I can't talk.
Desensitized.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That and her and Shine especially have just been completely desensitized to this level of horrific violence at such a young age.
Yeah.
And you're right. The idea that like Sheena goes through this whole film and he never really has that breakdown moment. The I want my mom, I want, I'm really just a kid moment. He's hardened until the end.
Mm-hmm.
And there's kids younger that they hang out with, and Morrow, and it's just fascinating. You get these kids who effectively, it reminded me of like Peter Pan's Lost Boys almost. The idea that, it's like this found family, that their families are gone. And instead of just, dying out, they're going to live together. They're going to support each other, and they're going to live together until they get caught by these horrible people around them.
Yes, yes. And it's funny that you bring up this Peter Pan comparison, because there's a comic called Peter Panzerfaust, and it's actually like Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, but it's like during World War II, and it's like children in the World War II setting, like of a big city that's been bombed out. I can't remember which city it is, but that's what this movie feels like. There's almost no one in this movie. There's barely any people besides these kids. It's like these kids, and then just like empty streets. And then there's a bus driver,
I was going to say, and then there's a random bus that's picking people up, and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
And then there's outside of the opening scene in the school, it's basically these kids and these gangsters. And a confluence of circumstances that continues to bring them together. Right. A stolen cell phone, a stolen gun, a cell phone that has incriminating video. But yeah, really, it's a very small cast, and yeah.
And we should point out that one of the cast members, one of the villains, is actually a guy that's in the fucking MCU. Though I think because of recent allegations, he's not going to be in it much longer. You just did a reaction.
I honestly did not even realize that. El Chino?
El Chino, yes, is Namor, or Namor. They call him Namor in
my
Wakanda
goodness.
Forever.
Wow, talk about a mind-blown moment. I had no idea, and I just rewatched the movie, and I'm staring at him, and I'm going, oh, he's good. He's so friggin' intense. I had no idea. And yes, there are allegations against him, so we don't have to spend too much time. But that really blew my mind right now. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. So his name is Tencho Huerta, and he's Namor in Wakanda Forever. In this movie, he's El Chino, who's kind of like the main gangster in this area. One of the
which is especially scary because he's the politician running for office. Right. And he's the unabashed murdering gangster.
Right.
In this, he kidnaps women and children. He murders sometimes his own gang members. Right. Murders women and children. There's a really funny moment towards the end of the film where one of the kids sees him in the flesh and goes, "I'm not voting for him," which I think is like such a funny line in such a, like bringing levity to, it's something a kid would say. It's like, not understanding how serious the situation is. So let me kind of make a joke in that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There are moments like that, like levity within all this, like sort of madness and violence. I mentioned to you last night that there's a movie called City of God, which takes place in a part of Brazil where there's a lot of crime and poverty, right? And I recommend you go check it out when you can. But there's similarities between the two. Like, there's a scene in here where the kids go up to the cops and they literally show a man committing murder, like torturing someone and committing murder on a phone, and the cops are like, "Get out of here, kids!" Like they basically don't want to get involved. There's like so many scenes where it's just a totally different world, and you're not used to it, and that's why I wanted to keep watching that Guillermo del Toro, Isa Lopez video, because I wanted to know how much of this is an exaggeration, how much of it is almost like fantasy, because it's so over the top. And then how much is like this?
I only got to watch the first 15 minutes of that.
Ditto.
But Del Toro mentions, he said, like, he does say, like, this is Mexico. And, like, you could be out to dinner with your friends and you walk outside and there's a shooting next door.
Yeah.
And so, there's obviously these filmmakers, Lopez and Del Toro, have seen, obviously the country of Mexico is not this movie incarnate,
right?
But there are certainly parts of Mexico that embody this film, just like there would be parts of America that would, if all you saw of American film, it was like you said, Winter's Bone or, Menace to Society,
Menace to Society,
or The Sopranos.
Right.
You would think, oh, that's what all America is, and obviously it's not. But that stuff does exist.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And growing up on Staten Island, I was like, oh yeah, The Sopranos kind of is America, But I was gonna say that I just mentioned that there's fairy tale aspect to it, which is like the unrealistic part, and that's mainly focused on these 3 wishes that Estrella has with these 3 pieces of chalk. Now, she uses those 3 wishes throughout the movie. And you mentioned this because we've talked about this movie a couple times when we talk about True Detective. You've mentioned how it's like one of those movies where things could be happening in reality and it's explained by reality, but then it could also be explained through fantasy too. So like every time she makes a wish, it kind of matches up with what's going on in reality, but it could also be written off as, see, her wish came true. And like her first wish is that her mother comes back. And that really lends itself to the horror aspect of this movie. There's stuff that's in True Detective season 4 that remind me of this part of the movie. There's stuff in Devil's Backbone, and also because obviously there's a connection. There's some DNA between her and Guillermo del Toro. Crimson Peak. There's that sort of horror trope of the dead are scary and they're scary to look at, but they're essentially helping you with the more evil living,
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. To me, this is it. Del Toro is the king of monsters exist, but humans are the scarier monsters.
Exactly.
And there's no better film for that than Pan's Labyrinth.
Right.
The general in Pan's Labyrinth is one of the most evil characters ever put to film. And he is more evil and scarier than the pale man who has his eyes like this and eats berries.
Right.
So, and this movie reminded me a lot of Pan's Labyrinth.
Sure.
In a good way. Like, even like there's a point where it almost feels like there's like a little kind of fairy leading Estrella around, and like she holds up the phone and it like hops into it and gets on the bus with her.
Right.
And like there, so and we talked about this again with our True Detective review last episode. The fact that, and you just kind of hinted at this, the idea that things are happening in the real world, but there also could be a supernatural element. Here, it's very obvious that there is a supernatural element, but it also could just be manifestations of these kids' imaginations. And the fact that at the end of the day, these are children living in a bleak, miserable existence who are using their imaginations to, just get by hour by hour. My favorite scene maybe in the whole movie is when they talk about how they're going to go to a house that has a zoo and a soccer field.
Yeah.
And then they find this like abandoned home where a fish tank broke, and the fish and all the water falls into this like broken like piece of land, earth, where like the water pools, so the fish are swimming in like the sidewalk almost, or like a piece of the ground.
Right.
And they're like, oh my God, look, it's a zoo. And then they go upstairs and they find like
Soccer
a bunch
balls.
of soccer balls. And
and nets.
and it's like, again, how much of that is their imagination? How much of that is reality? You know, another part of that interview I saw was like, you know, both of them, Isa Lopez and Guillermo del Toro, are saying like, she said, not every part of the movie makes sense. Not every part of the movie has logic. And he was like, yo, yeah. He's like, if you go to the movies and you're sitting in the movie theater going, I need this movie to make sense, maybe you should go see another movie.
Fuck yeah. Oh God.
And I think that's one of my biggest like bugaboos with a lot of films, and this is including a lot of films that people love and are critically acclaimed, is I hate when things are spelled out for the viewer. I call it like the sledgehammer of subtlety, where it's like, this is what the movie's about.
Right.
Like I could have figured that out for myself. I didn't need every question answered. You know, I feel like questions being answered is better for television, where you're making a long-term investment. You're showing up week after week after week for, by the time a series is over, it could be literal hours or days or weeks of your life.
Yeah.
And that's where I want my questions answered. Sure. In a 75 to 140 minute movie, I just want you to tell a good story and make me think about things.
Yes.
And I think this movie does a great job of that. And I think it kind of goes along with what both of them were saying in that interview.
That is a really, really good point. That movies are much more brief than an entire season of a TV show, and they're much more brief than like a novel that might be like 500 pages, or if we're going Stephen King, 1,000 pages. You know, you want certain answers after so much dedication, but a movie is a much more brief thing. It's like listening to a song. And, you know, and Isa Lopez, like Guillermo del Toro, is an artist. You know, they're making art. They're a lot more concerned about like the imagery and stuff than like they have to pedantically explain everything to people. So yeah, that's a really, really good point, man. Like, there are some really awesome visuals throughout this movie, and it only cost like $1.6 million to make. So like some of the visuals, there is a line of blood that kind of, you know, goes either behind Estrella or kind of guides her at different points in the movie. I love that effect. It's so simple. It's so basic, but just a line of blood. It tells so much. There's also like a gun that Shine has stolen from a gangster named Kako. And it has like, it's kind of a cool looking gun. It's got like 666 on it. It's got snakes, and like the snake comes off the gun at one point and slithers away. I love that. And that's once again another scene where it's like, okay, well, in reality, we can explain what happened. Essentially, Chino kind of lets on that he killed Kako. But then in Estrella's mind, she feels like she did the wish that she didn't have to kill him, and that's why he's dead already. She you know, and
her wishes, those chalk pieces end up they're almost like monkey paws.
Yes,
like,
yes.
You get the wish, but it's not what you wanted. You know, right. I want my mother. Like when she says, "I wish for my mother back," she wants her mother to come home. She doesn't realize her mother's dead, and that she's like, you know, her corpse is now coming, like in this like ghostly visage. When she's saying, "I don't want to have to kill Kako," you know, for her, it feels like she's, by wishing that, you know, she's now putting his death on somebody else.
Right.
And it's, you know, that feels very monkey paw-esque, you know?
Yes. And you know what? We'll get to that third wish and how tragic that third wish is too in a couple of minutes. But we should talk about some of the sadness in the movie too. Because, you know, we are dealing with child actors. We're dealing with death. There's a number at the beginning of the movie, and goddamn, I wish I had fucking written it down. But they basically talk about how there's all these missing people. I mean, it's in the hundreds of thousands, I think, of missing people in the beginning during the drug war, and they say that like the number isn't even counted for kids. The idea is that like there's this many women that are missing, there's this many men, but then like for kids they don't even count that number because there's so many kids. And there's just talk throughout the movie of like what happens to these people when they're killed by the gangs, or their body parts are sold and the people eat their body parts, and they don't really go into any kind of idea of raping and stuff, but they say like something happens to the women. There's all this horrible stuff that is alluded to. And then we do see a child get killed. Well, we actually see multiple children get killed on screen. But the first one, which is a very sad one, is there's this boy named Morrow who Kako and his group come after. Well, not Kako. Kako's brother. They come after the kids at one point to get the phone back and to get the gun back. And then they are shooting at the kids. And then Morrow, this little kid who's like younger than my 7-year-old daughter, shoots one of them in the leg, but then they shoot him right in the kind of stomach, chest area. And it's really sad because he's such a cute little kid,
Again, like these kids acting just blew me away to have to deal with scenes that are that heavy.
Yeah.
And that also just the scene where they like grab his body, they take it up, and they like have like a makeshift funeral for him.
Yeah.
Where when the other boys leave, now Morrow effectively comes back as a ghost, and that's where we get another great little effect, which is the tiger stuffed animal.
Yes.
It kind of comes to life as a guide for Estrella for the rest of the film.
Yeah.
Showing up in the vents at the end and leading her to where she needs to go. And I love that. And I love the title of the film and how it keeps coming back to that, and how it keeps circling back to that. This idea, and it goes back to that opening scene in the classroom of like fairy tales and, princes and princesses and fairies and wishes and warriors and tigers. And it's like, oh, well, and they say, tigres no tienen miedo. Tigers don't have fear. Tigers are not afraid. And Shine is supposed to be like the tiger for the group. But Morrow has a stuffed tiger, and there's all this graffiti on the walls that at times like the graffiti starts to move and come alive. And it's just fantastic imagery throughout. Like it's so simple, like you said with the bloodline, so simple but so effective in the way it's done.
Yeah, I love it. And the stuffed animal that you just mentioned, the tiger that's moving around, like this is a movie that has like $1 million, $1.5 million budget, and they have this like CGI tiger walking around, and they have like corpses going, moving around.
I think it was actually like, I think they actually used like a practical stuffed animal for some of those scenes at least.
Sure, yeah, and maybe they use like computers to kind of like get rid of any kind of kinks or stuff. But no, I mean it's all really good looking considering how small the budget is. And you mentioned that graffiti, and it's funny because we kind of keep talking about how it's just these kids, and it's like this sort of like almost like apocalyptic setting. At one point, two of the boys, which are kind of like the comedic relief of the group, they have like shoe shine on their face, and they call it war paint. And like Shine's like, "What the hell are you doing? You just have shoe polish on your face." But that's that kind of feeling, whether it's because of an actual literal war between countries, whether it is like a drug war where it's like cartels and there's not any kind of like government control or like police control, and it's just like crazy crime chaos, or it's like a literal apocalypse where like the world has ended. Like I kept thinking of like The Last of Us when I would watch this too. Whatever the case, you see the same kind of imagery where there's like graffiti, and it's basically like people sending messages to each other. This is our territory over here. These people have been here. And there is a mural for this kid Morrow at one point where it shows him leaving the group with his little stuffed animal and his sad little face. So, I mean, it's kind of amazing that I just described 3 different ways that an apocalyptic setting can happen, and this movie has one of those settings, you know. And then it's funny too because like 30 Days of Night has that kind of apocalyptic setting too, even though it's like in America in a modern day. And then I feel like we have like the beginnings of that in True Detective season 4 too. Would
I
you
was
say?
gonna say I was waiting for you to bring it back to Night Country, because like if you swap out Mexico for the Mexican culture for the indigenous culture
Right,
of Alaska in
right,
Ennis in True Detective Night Country, it
right.
does feel very similar.
Yeah,
It feels like there are a lot of potential crossover themes, including like the way the indigenous people
yeah,
are completely being violated, and the cave and the mines and the water turning black. It feels the idea, the thing that we brought up about how it's realistic violence that is taking place, like kidnapping, women being abused, uh, but at the same time also there is a supernatural element. So it does feel like there's and we're only 3 episodes in.
I
Episode
know.
4 drops tomorrow
Tonight? Oh,
night.
tomorrow night. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
I was going to ask you, did you see Wind River with Jeremy
yes,
Renner and Elizabeth Olsen? Right.
yes.
So I love Wind River, and it's kind of like these movies that are all made by the same guy that made like Yellowstone. I don't give a shit about that, but I love that movie. Uh, and that's another thing that reminds me of True Detective season 4 a lot. That and this movie really focus on how like women just seem to like just disappear in these kind of settings, and it like it almost is like they don't even try to keep track. Like in the case of Wind River, they do this thing about how they talk about how like indigenous women go missing and people don't even go to look for them, right? And that's kind of like in True Detective season 4, where Annie K is dead and they just kind of write it off and they don't investigate further. So there's similarities between those two. And then with this, it's like children just go missing and there's no force trying to like save them or stop them.
No, I mean, there's the one scene where Estrella saves Morrow and he's in a cage and there's other kids in there. But
Yeah,
also, it's also, bringing up the women. Her mom was kidnapped and murdered and tortured by Chino
right,
for no apparent reason.
right.
And, you know, at the climactic horror moment of the film, you get this scope of just how many, not only how many people are killed, but how just like it's just it's not even a thought in these criminals' mind. It's like so many bodies. It's like, oh, here's another dead one. Wrap it up in plastic, throw it in the murder room, and we'll just leave
Disposable.
those bodies there to rot forever.
Yep.
And it's a room full of the literal stench of death, as you can see the characters.
Yeah.
And it just it really makes you think about what life is like. And again, I thought about and it's something I wouldn't have thought about 4 years ago when I first saw this movie, but it's something because of the fact we're watching True Detective. I'm thinking of like the indigenous people, the indigenous women in Night Country, and
Right.
that scene where in the last episode where they go to the like indigenous section where it's like the law doesn't matter here. You're on native land, so unless you have a warrant, get off my land. And
Yeah.
it reminded me of like scenes like that. Yeah, it's just I just like restarted the movie just to see. It was like 160,000 people go missing and like countless children. Yeah,
Countless
it's
children.
crazy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's super disturbing, and that kind of brings us up to the final death of the movie, which is pretty upsetting. It's upsetting, but it's also like really well done. Right. So we get to our final wish, and Shine who he's kind of had like a adversarial relationship with Estrella throughout the whole movie. You know, it's revealed eventually that Estrella did not kill Kako. And you know, then the kids in the group call her a liar because she claims that she did kill him. They don't want anything to do with her. He's trying to get rid of her and not have her be a part of the gang through the beginning of the movie. Then eventually they bond. He's the one that discovers that Estrella, her mother, is the woman that's tortured in the video that's on the phone, and he goes to show her, right? He has this, like, she makes a claim. She's like, what if my wish could get rid of that burn on your face? And at the very end of the movie, she takes that last piece of chalk and she makes an X right there. And it's so well done because it's like she's literally putting a fucking target right on his face. And then to literally be like, well, the burn is gone, it's because he's shot right there in his face at the end of the movie. And it's upsetting, but it's also like beautifully done where I'm like, okay, I accept that, you know? What'd you think of that part?
I remember I remember sitting in the movie theater and like jolting when that happened because the bloodline comes like shooting through her legs, hits him in the foot, and you start to, and I'm like, and like my head is not going fast enough. So like my head is going, oh, they're not going to kill Sheena. Oh crap, he's dead. And, you know, again, it's that idea that you're not used to seeing children die until you're watching a movie where it's just part of life and
right.
You've already been through Morrow's death.
Right.
But then, you know, the idea that like death is not the end. In, you know, and that, you know, the Morrow came back as a ghost and guided her, and the tiger helped guide her, and now, you know, Sheena helps guide her towards the end. And then there's the tiger at the end, which I thought was such a great little touch. And I also wonder if like she was on the like set with that tiger, if that was like like here you go, first time 10-year-old actress, here's a giant tiger.
I actually did have that exact same thought. I was like, is that an actual tiger there? Is it just like CGI in there with her? So even that is explained though, right? Because don't they kind of say that Chino, or they say that someone had a tiger at one point too, right? In the town, right? That he would feed people to him. I think they say at the beginning.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So that it kind of explains why an actual tiger could be there, not just fantasy. I mean, obviously I take it as like metaphorical, but the part that I didn't really get, Danny, and maybe you could explain it, it's kind of ironic because you're talking about how you don't want movies to like beat you over the head with the meaning and stuff. But like she opens the doors at the end, and it's like the last shot of the movie after Chino has gotten his justice by being in the room with all the corpses, and the corpses kind of come to life, and Shine even like lights the corpses on fire. She like walks out into this like beautiful field. Now, how did you interpret that?
So I'm not 100% sure. I took it as like the end of like the darkest like moment. Like she was fearing for her death. Her mother, she saw her mother's corpse, and her mother's corpse, like ghost, helped her survive. And, you know, all of her friends are dead. And it's like just a complete, like, I can start a life anew kind of thing.
Yeah.
I also kind of thought maybe she was killed in what had happened.
Okay.
And we don't know. And like maybe they didn't want to show that. And that's Isa Lopez's way of like hinting that Estrella died, and this is her opening, you know, to a beautiful, you know, heaven.
Yep.
I did see an article that was like, Isa Lopez talks about the original and the much darker original ending.
Oh, okay.
And again, maybe it's in that hour-long interview where she talks about that.
Yeah.
I didn't get up to that yet, but I'm gonna look into it a little bit more. maybe she was supposed to die on screen, and that was, her way of interpreting, the end of her life. I don't know. Those are my two, that it's either her imagination that, Chino's dead, she got closure with her mother, and she helped Shine at the end, even though he's dead. And it's just like her imagination is allowing her to see beauty in the world now.
Yeah.
Or she died, and that is her, opening the door to the next life.
Yes.
Those are my two takes. I'm sure neither are correct.
Right. Yeah. Well, honestly, I had those same interpretations as well. Spoilers for Pan's Labyrinth, but Pan's Labyrinth always kind of struck me as like, wow, in the real world, the little girl dies, and then in the fantasy world, she, kind of has this fairy tale ending. I saw kind of parallels to this as well.
Yeah.
And I was like, go ahead.
I took Charlotte to see Pan's Labyrinth not too long ago. They did a screening of it at Nighthawk Cinema by me.
Yeah.
And I forgot just how little fantasy is actually in that movie.
Yeah.
The fantasy scenes are few and far between. They're amazing when you see them.
Right.
But it is essentially just a brutal war movie.
Yup.
And I was almost taken aback by how dark and bleak it was. And I remembered that she died at the end, but just the idea that she gets her ending in the fairy tale, with Pan and with her parents.
Yeah.
And I could totally see this being an homage to that, or something in that vein, for Estrella. But again, I'm fine not knowing. I'd like to read more, just because I happen to be doing some research in the last 30 minutes or so before we started recording.
Right.
So maybe I'll find that article I saw and see what the darker, bleaker ending was.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'm actually going to put the articles that you wrote for Geeks of Doom in the description of this video. So if people want to read your two articles that you shared with me, and, I think I'll even tie in this Isa Lopez, Guillermo del Toro interview.
Yeah, I was going to say, you should put the link in the description so people can watch this video.
Yeah, man. So I've actually really enjoyed talking about this with you. I was looking forward to this, especially the more I learned about this movie. I was like, shit, I'm excited. I'm really glad that you recommended this. Because,
when you told me True Detective season 4 is kind of a horror thing, and and I was seeing people on Twitter mention The Thing, and I was like, oh, do I have to watch True Detective season 4? And weeks ago, when we started talking about this as the potential next show we're going to cover,
right,
you were like, oh yeah, it's not connected to any of the other seasons. You can just start watching it.
Right.
And when I saw her name in the credits, I did a backflip internally. If I tried to do a backflip, I'd be in the hospital. But I was like, holy shit. Isa Lopez is it's not like she directed the first episode, which is what I thought originally. She created this whole season and co-writes and directs every episode. And I'm like, holy shit. I was such a fan of this movie that it immediately hooked me into wanting to watch this show. And then I was hooked on Night Country from 15 minutes into the first episode. I was like, oh yeah, okay. And even those moments of levity that we brought up in Tigers Are Not Afraid, you see that in Night Country also. The quirky back and forth dialogue between Navarro and Danvers, and how they don't like each other, but they're also extreme sarcasm to the point of dark comedy. It toys with that also. And Isa Lopez started making romantic comedies and comedies, which is strange given what she's now known for over the last 7 or 8 years since Tigers came out.
Yeah. It's funny, because you talk about romantic comedies, and she talks about in this interview how that was how she was surviving as a filmmaker for a while, but then she had to make this movie, and she essentially went up to the producers and said, look, you're gonna decline this movie, and that's okay. I'm gonna take it to another group of filmmakers, and they're probably gonna decline it as well. But then if they do make it, they're gonna get the rest of my romantic comedies that I'm gonna make too. And she said that romantic comedies are like a staple of Mexican culture, like that's a big genre over there, romantic comedies. And one point I want to bring up that's just so funny, Guillermo del Toro, like right around that time, he says that there's basically two types of movies. You remember what he says? He says like
movies that wake you up and movies that put you to sleep.
Yes. And this movie is absolutely a movie that wakes you up. It woke me up to Isa Lopez as a talent, and now she's definitely on my radar. Isa, if you have watched this video and you like what we said, we would love to have you on the show. I know that's a long shot, but we'd love to have you on the show. Danny, what do we have coming up on the Lassercast?
We got more True Detective Night Country.
Yes.
And, I'm going to be reviewing Shudder just released, I think just now. I can't check on my TV, but I think it is up on the Shudder now, the Dario Argento documentary Panico,
nice.
which I'm going to be watching and reviewing. And then I'm going to be doing some short reviews of some more Dario Argento films that I go and see in the theater for this big Argento retrospective that's happening at IFC. Really excited for Monday night because it's the Shudder Showcase, and they're showing Tenebrae, which is one of my favorite Argento films. I'm seeing Inferno tomorrow, which is low-key my favorite of I think I might like it more than Suspiria.
Nice.
So I'm super excited to see that on the big screen. We got more Night Country, more Isa Lopez content, and then we got some Argento content, and then we'll figure it out from there.
Yeah, man. So if you guys liked this video, make sure you subscribe to the Lassercast, and we will see you guys